So when last we left Abbott and Costello, we left them at one of their highest points. Hold That Ghost, as I mentioned, I think is the best movie of their early phase. That first block of their career, I really think this was the high watermark. Like, it just, as I mentioned in the review, it just felt like it got everything right. The story, the use of routines, some creative directing, an excellent supporting cast. It just felt like all the pieces finally came together in just the right way to tell a good story, keep it entertaining, and put Abbott and Costello in the forefront. Now, the problem with hitting a high watermark is that everything that comes after it is going to pale in comparison. And I think as we look at these last films in their early era, their early stages, and I'll tell you kind of where the blocks are as we go through. Every other film that comes after this one, some of them are going to get up to it. There are some good ones. We're going to see Whodunit, Hit the Ice, Rio Rita. You know, those are good films, and those are up here in the upper echelon. But then we're going to start looking at some of the others that are going to start, tapering off. And where they start to taper off is when they start to ignore the formula that made Hold That Ghost so good. And that is kind of what happens here with this film, Keep 'Em Flying. We find that the writers and producers and whatnot fell backwards into bad habits and kind of ignore the lessons of Hold That Ghost, which is understandable. I want to stress that. It's understandable because, again, these films were coming out. Boom, 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 boom. All right? Like, what is this? This is their fourth film plus One Night in the Tropics. All of them made and released within a year. All right, that is astonishing. That is an insane turnaround. So obviously you don't really have the time to kind of see one movie come out, see what worked, see what happens, and see what the audience reaction is, and then go and start working on the next one and figuring out what worked and what you want to keep. No, you're just like boom, 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 get them out, get them out, get them out, get them out, get them out. It's more like a TV show, really, than it is movies. And so what we're going to find when we look at this one, and especially when we look at the next one, that we fall back into some of these bad habits, and I think the films suffer for it. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's talk about this one. So obviously, with Buck Privates being this massive hit and this cultural touchstone, In the Navy coming out and being just as big a hit, if not bigger, the logical train of thought was, well, we got to do another service picture. We got to get them into another service picture. And of course, at that time, there's only one branch of the service really left, and that was the Army Air Corps, which was not the Air Force yet. It was the Army Air Corps. So it was decided that now Bud and Lou would join the Army Air Corps for Keep 'Em Flying. So the story, let's one step at a time. So the story of this one is that Bud and Lou are best friends with this pilot by the name of Jinx. I believe his name is Jinxie. And they're three friends, and they work in a carnival. Jinx gets the word that he's been drafted into the Army Air Corps, and he's of course really happy to do it. He's a hotshot pilot. He knows everything. And he's a smug dick. And of course he goes and he's going to take Bud and Lou with him. So Bud and Lou go. They're taken in as mechanics. That's the setup. We'll talk about the story, quote unquote, here in a minute, and the problems with that. Interesting note, real quick, before we get too into this. So this film was released November 28th, 1941. It was originally scheduled for a later release, but it coincided with Keep 'em Flying Week. This was a big publicity thing by the Air Force, not by the Air Force, but by the Army Air Corps, to kind of drum up support and maybe get people to sign on, get people interested. And of course, with the name of the film being Keep 'em Flying, the two things went together perfectly. Something I find very interesting in a historical, sad kind of way is that clearly, like I said, this movie's released in November, so we're about a little less than a month away from the events of Pearl Harbor. So we are not at war yet. But it's interesting that as each one of these service pictures came out, the atmosphere of it, and I'm going to have to use the term the propaganda president begins getting a lot stronger. You would be forgiven, as I did, until I kind of looked up the date again. I thought this one came out after the war had begun. No, it's still, like I say, it's a little less than a month away. But some of the dialogue in this film is, I don't know, it's a lot more, I'm going to say ominous, because it feels like they already know that shit is going to go down. It's going to go down soon. You just get that feeling. What's interesting is when I'm saying propaganda, and that has a very negative connotation, but I don't mean it as such in these instances, because honestly, the propaganda parts of this movie, there are two big propaganda parts of this film. There's two of the best moments. And one of the first ones, when Bud and Lou are trying to sneak onto the Air Force base, they go to the USO building. And Lou Costello says, what does OSO mean, obviously. And Bud launches into this speech about not USO, not OSO, USO. It's a thing donated by unselfish Americans to give these boys. He launches into this this speech about how great the USO is, and how unselfish Americans. It's a commercial. But here's the thing: you don't mind it because it's very heartfelt. Watching that scene and watching Bud do that, you realize a couple things. Number one, you realize why Abbott and Costello sold more war bonds than anybody else, and that is a historical fact. They sold more war bonds than anybody. And watching that scene, you understand why. Because Bud is a natural salesman. He's a natural huckster. That's why his character that he plays in all these movies is such a fast-talking comment. He was a carnival barker, for crying out loud. And you really hear it in his voice and in his performance that he believes what he's saying. He is touting these benefits. And it's a wonderful, again, it's propaganda, but it's honest, and it's natural, and it's heartfelt. You can really feel what he's trying to do there. So that's one. The other one is this really great speech by Lou Costello. And again, this highlights why these guys sold so many war bonds. The honesty in the performance and the earnestness of what he's saying. So when Bud and Lou run into the head of the base, and he says, "Well, we can't use you. You guys aren't pilots. You're not, look at you. You're bumbling idiots." And Lou gives him this speech about there's a lot of men like us out there where maybe we're not the smartest, maybe we're not, the best, maybe we got flat feet, but we want to help. We want to contribute. There's got to be something that we can do, and maybe it's not flying these planes, or maybe it's not doing all this brave stuff, but there has to be something that we can do to help our country, to help. Again, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was released after the war, because again, what it's saying is that to the audience, you may not be a pilot or you may not be the best, but everybody can do something to contribute to what we are doing. And when World War II finally does hit, that's kind of historically, that's the big thing we all take away from that, is how everybody chipped in, from the guys fighting the war to the women who were nurses or went to work in the munitions plants, to the little kids organizing scrap drives and donating their bikes and roller skates and comic books to make things that were needed. It's the growing of victory gardens. It's that big we can do it feel of World War II that we all kind of cling to. It's why it makes it such a great story. And this is one of those seeds being planted of that. Just because you're a chubby little fellow and a goof off and a screw up like Lou, you can still contribute to the greater victory. And again, it's a really, really good moment. Let's talk about the other good things before I really land blast certain things about certain parts of this film. So once again, as I mentioned in the Hold That Ghost review, one of the things that came out of Hold That Ghost is they kind of realized that if you give Lou Costello a female partner, somebody he can bounce romantic comedy off of, you have a whole new avenue. And of course, Camille Brewster from Hold That Ghost was probably the best. Joan Davis, obviously, was the first and arguably the best. In this film, we're given Martha Raye, who now becomes Lou Costello's romantic interest. And you have, again, a fun dynamic. He's short and squat. She's taller than he is. She's a little thicker. She's not fat, but she's not like one of these, petite little blonde numbers they put in these movies. She's a little thicker. She's a little bit more full in the face. She's pretty, but not what you consider, that conventional, blonde. She's a lot more assertive. So you've got little Lou Costello, kind of the little kid, in a grown man's body, and this very assertive woman going, "Kiss me, you idiot!" He's just like, he doesn't get it. It's a good combination, and it works very, very well. She's a good foil for him, and actually, I think we have to give Martha Raye a lot of credit, because actually in this movie she plays twins. Part of the joke of this one is she plays a pair of sisters, one who becomes the love interest of Lou Costello and one who becomes the love interest of Bud Abbott. So of course Lou is always thinking that Bud's going after his girl. So that's kind of one of the running jokes, and she does a really good job of portraying two very different characters. One being much more soft-spoken, Gloria, I can't do that, and one being much louder, "Come on, bring on the Navy, woohoo!" That kind of thing. So she plays two very different characters and does it incredibly well. We also have to give a huge shout out to the director and the special effects team, the visual effects team. Obviously, having one person play two characters in the same shot is a really old Hollywood trick. We've seen it a million times. But you've got to appreciate how difficult that must have been back in the day, when you didn't have the computer technology to just go boop, 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 green screen and we're done. And it's really done well here. Like, there's only one shot in this where you can tell it's a superimposed film over another. So it's really, really good, and I give them all the credit in the world for it. You would be forgiven, as I was. I knew it was one person, but you'd be forgiven for thinking it was two different actors. So yeah, I've got to give that a lot of credit. This leads to the kind of the big routine of the film. This is another one my friends and I did for a talent show. It's the I don't even know what you call it, like the lunch counter, where Bud and Lou are trying to get lunch, but they only have a nickel. Imagine you could get lunch for a nickel back then. So Bud tells Lou, "Don't order anything. I'll order a turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then I'll give you half." So Lou says, "Right." And they say, "Well, what do you want?" And Bud says, "A turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee." Go, "Okay, Lou, what do you want?" "I don't care for nothing." And Bud's like, "Oh, come on, get something." He keeps goading him into getting something until he finally says, "All right, I'll get something." And then Bud smacks him, and that whole bit. Classic vaudeville. Very funny. And of course, the twin sisters play into it, where they keep coming in and out, and one of them is going to give Lou free food. So she gives him the free food, but he tries to eat it. The other one comes out and takes it away, so they're getting confused. I'm not doing it justice. Good comedy, classic vaudeville, works great here. So that's the good things about this movie. And I do think it's very earnest, and the heartfelt moments are very, very powerful, even especially from a historical standpoint. So let's talk about what doesn't work. And there are a couple things that really weigh this film down. Number one, it is the story. Because once again, this one falls back on the Buck Privates model, where, okay, so you have this boy-girl story going on that's always kind of in the background of a lot of Abbott and Costello movies. But once again, kind of like with Buck Privates, it's almost like you really are watching two different movies sandwiched together. You know, at least in the Navy, Dick Powell had multiple scenes with Abbott and Costello. You know, and Abbott and Costello had multiple scenes with, the reporter that was chasing after him. So at least they were involved in the plot, even if they weren't the center of it. Here, they have no connection to anything that's going on. The movie is about this trick pilot friend of theirs who goes into the Army Armed Services. He's hitting on one girl whose brother is also there, but the brother is scared to solo because he saw his dad crash when he was a kid, so he wigs out. On top of that, the commanding officer has some kind of history with Jinx, where he turned him in for being a jackass, and Jinx has never forgiven him. It's all of this shit that has nothing to do with Abbott and Costello. Not a damn thing. And here's the problem. Aside from that, at least in Buck Privates, the story, while separate from Bud and Lou, made sense. A guy gets into the Army, doesn't want to be there, and grows up. For lack of better terminology, becomes a man. The Army makes a man out of him. All right? Okay, fair enough. In the Navy, Dick Powell wants to lead a normal life and wants to be like, an honest Joe in the Navy. Okay, great. Likable characters with understandable characters. This guy is a fucking asshole. He is the typical Army Air Corps / Air Force movie archetype. He's a hotshot who is cocky. He doesn't follow the rules. He is never punished for any of the things that he does. Or when he does, it's always framed as the commanding officer is wrong and he is right. Of course, he has to go save the guy who thinks he's a dangerous asshole to prove that his dangerous assholeness is essential to the service, and I wish I had a dozen more just like him, kind of thing. It's a character that you don't like, you don't want to be around, and is just fucking annoying. And again, never gets his comeuppance, never learns a lesson. Doesn't learn to kind of follow the beat and, serve in this man's army, kind of like the guys in Buck Privates did. He's just a fucking ass. So why do I want to watch a movie about him in the middle of my Abbott and Costello film? The answer is, I don't. Compound on that the fact that he has like 3 plots going on: the love affair with the girl, working with her brother, and having to combat his commanding officer who doesn't like him. So not only does he get 1 plot, he gets 3 fucking plots. The other problem with this one, I mentioned this in the Navy, is that a lot of Abbott and Costello movies conclude with a giant chase scene. And I also mentioned that these chase scenes are my least favorite parts of Abbott and Costello movies. This one has 3. It has an extended period where Bud and Lou are chased around by a giant torpedo, which is mildly amusing. They have a part where Bud and Lou accidentally take off in a plane and spend an extended period of time doing, green screen stuff in front of a plane, which is actually quite impressive. It looks pretty good, I will admit. And then, shortly after that happens, jackass commander guy who doesn't like Jinx, he doesn't play by the rules, his parachute gets caught on the tail of the plane. So, of course, Jinx, who's been washed out, and Bud and Lou have to get into the plane and fly up and save him, so we do the whole thing again. So it's very... Again, it's not my cup of tea for their comedy. I don't like that stuff. So this film ultimately is a 50-50 split for me. I like the Bud and Lou stuff, obviously. I like the stuff with them and Martha Ray. I really appreciate the historical presence of this film, and I appreciate the earnestness in, touting things like the USO and presenting that message that anybody can contribute to the job that we're going to do, even though they didn't know kind of the extent, or at least I'm sure they suspected it. They must have, with all this buildup that they're doing prior to the war. But everything other than them is completely disposable and completely unnecessary, to the point where I can almost say I hate it. The stuff of that, I don't hate the movie. I just hate that chunk of it. So this is a fast forward, as I call it. You fast forward through the bits of non-Abbott and Costello to get to the Abbott and Costello. This is basically this could be a 30-minute episode of one of their TV shows as opposed to a feature-length movie. Definitely the weakest of the three service pictures, and one of the weaker of their early era films. Not the worst. Not the worst of their early era films, because that one is coming up next. So when we rejoin Drive Home Reviews meets Abbott and Costello, Bud and Lou are leaving the service and they're heading west, where they will learn to be cowboys. Sounds funny, doesn't it? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't quite work out that way, but we'll talk about that next time. So, as always, thank you for joining me, and please, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.